The first stage in our repair process was righting the wrongs of the last video. That includes using a admittedly pretty cheap hydraulic press to push out the bushings in a new subframe. I've actually got a second-hand one for pretty good value so that we could do all of this work outside of the car, have the car still technically functional, and then once we've pushed all of these bushings out and pushed the new ones in, we can then get to, actually replacing the subframe all in one go and all in one day, which is arguably the more important part. These bushings are massive and plastic, and well, let's just say they took a lot of force to get out and a lot more force to get back in. We also used a standard sort of bearing press type setup with threaded rod or hardened threaded rod to push the diff bushings out. There are two on the, front side and one larger one down at the bottom. These were arguably more of a pain because we couldn't use the hydraulic press just because of the shape of the subframe, but we did end up getting them out, especially the big one at the bottom was a lot of pain, but we got there. We also got the new ones pressed in, obviously the bores cleaned up a little bit. But in terms of actually replacing the subframe, well, that one is a bit of an interesting one. We cut some corners, and if I'm being honest, there are a lot of things that we did that I wouldn't necessarily recommend or that you need to do if you do it the sort of easier way. But of course, the first step is jacking up the car and safely putting it down on jack stands. We also stuck the wheels under the car just as an extra bit of safety, and there's chocks on the front wheels. Now, we kind of went ham on trying to remove every bolt we could because our intention was to basically remove all of the bolts from the control arms and leave the wheel hubs in the car. But there isn't really enough space for you to do that, so what I would actually recommend you do is just remove the whole subframe as one with the differential installed and basically take it all out as one big piece. You will need to remove this cross brace in the sort of towards the front of the car. It blocks your access to drop the exhaust down, which you do need to do. You can remove the exhaust fully if you like, but we were lazy and didn't and managed to get it done, so your mileage may vary. You also need to remove the two heat shields from the sort of drive shaft tunnel, which involves those tiny 7 or 8 mil very rusty fasteners, and you'll need to remove that exhaust hanger as well as the two towards the back of the car. You want to drop this piece, or the cross brace, down. I think it's 16 mil bolts, so there should be 4 plus a couple of the little panel screws. We've actually had this out before, so we didn't end up putting all of them back in, so it was a little bit easier. You also need to remove the drive shaft or prop shaft bolts. Technically, you only need to remove the 3 on the drive shaft itself, but we took them all out for ease. And then you will need to pry like hell on that to free them up, as it kind of gets seated in place quite thoroughly, although I'll talk more about that in a second. You'll also want to attack all of the subframe mounts. The front two are actually quite full mounts. They not only have the bolts that go into the subframe, but sort of supporting members, which require a couple of, I think, 16 mil bolts as well. And there's a bit of a plastic in the way that you need to deal with to the little 10 mil nut, a plastic nut inside. Now, the way that I would recommend you do this, like I said, is take the whole assembly out as one. And the easiest way to do that is to remove the bolts at the bottom of the shock absorbers, which you actually don't come out as one. You will need to pop them out, although I'll show you that in a second. And you will also need to drop the exhaust down for a bit of clearance. In fact, it probably needs to be a bit more than that as well. When you drop the whole assembly down, you will need to make sure that you take out all of the wiring harnesses like you see hanging down in the middle here. A couple of them are the sort of handbrake automatic handbrake wiring. Has a load of clips on the rear trailing arms. You need to undo those clips and swing the wiring harnesses out the way. You also need to undo the brake calipers, as you can see here, and we hung them on the springs since they're staying in the car. You also, when you do pop the shock absorbers, be careful. They are technically spring loaded slightly, especially thanks to the anti-roll bar, so be careful with that one. But they do have a little sort of race that they sit in, as you can see there, that you need to pop out. You'll also need to remove or loosen the central support bearing for the drive shaft. That gives you enough room, sort of wiggle room, to be able to pull the drive shaft at the prop shaft out of the differential. There's a little needle bearing in the center there that a sort of stud from the differential sits in, and so you need enough space to be able to pry that out. Once the brake calipers and the wiring for the wheel speed sensors are out and all of the subframe bolts are out, you can then very carefully, and I mean very carefully because this thing's heavy as hell, start to lower it down. We ended up removing these heat shield brackets just for a bit of extra space, bit of extra sort of clearance, and we did end up lowering the exhaust even lower to be able to get it out. When I say that we wrestled this thing out, I'm not kidding. This was a massive pain, but once it's out, you have all of the space in the world to get as big a breaker bar as you like and crack open all of the bolts. I suppose get all the nuts off first and then you can pull the bolts out, compared to when it's in the car when you have next to no space to do anything. So trust me when I say it is a lot easier to have it out of the car. Once you get all of the bolts out, you can just basically take the obviously diff out, the 3 bolts that hold that in, and the 3 sort of subframe mounts, or actually 4 in total I think, that you'll need to remove out of there. Then you can pop the new one down. We started with reinstalling the diff first. That gave us enough sort of wiggle room to hold it in place nicely, and it also kept the drive shafts in reasonably good condition rather than being crushed and pinched on the floor and that sort of thing. Then we attacked putting all of the arms back into place. It was a bit of a pain to get them all in and in the right orientation, and the other thing that we focused quite heavily on was making sure that all of the little alignment discs were both present and installed, and were in basically the same position as when we took them off of the other subframe. I'm really happy to say that when we took this for an alignment, the back was more aligned than the front of the car. That's how, well we had lined it up, which I'm very happy with. I would also say that we tightened all of these bolts to Kingdom Come, but we did technically tighten them while not at the proper ride height, as it were, as obviously it's not on the car, it's not on the ground, but when you were getting an alignment, so they're going to undo most of the bolts anyway, and with how the car, or how the subframe is sitting, their arms are actually pretty much at ride height, so we're relatively happy with that, and obviously if we're capable of doing this, we're capable of replacing the arms later anyway, so 6 1/2 a dozen. We also attacked replacing the flex disc, because again, if you're going to go this far, you may as well replace it, and the one that we had was starting to show some signs of wear for sure. Now, trying to get the whole subframe, including the diff and the knuckles, the bearings, the brake discs, everything back into the car, to say it was a challenge, and we really wrestled with it quite ferociously, would be an understatement. This was arguably the most difficult part of the job, just getting it back in, but with quite a lot of shuffling, and I mean quite a lot of shuffling, we did manage to get it back into place. We stuck a couple of the subframe bolts in first to hold it in place, and then went about actually attaching everything, putting the drive shaft back in and putting those bolts back in, and obviously tightening them well, putting the exhaust back up, connecting all of the wiring harnesses, putting the brake calipers back down. We did end up breaking one of the brake pad wear sensors, which is now throwing an error. That is a relatively simple fix, but it is a bit of an annoyance. It was just kind of stuck, and I just didn't click where that wire was going, and accidentally basically ripped it straight off, so my mistake. But that's kind of it back together. Like I said, we got an alignment, and I'm very happy to say that the rear is in great shape. It's driving a lot better now, and so that is how to very badly, but technically, replace your rear subframe on an F10 5 Series. Like I said, I don't really recommend that you do this. I would definitely recommend paying a professional if you can, but that is it done. If you want to see more kind of mistakes that we keep making, then you can hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification icon. If you want to see more videos like this one, or more standard car reviews and that sort of stuff, check out the videos on the end cards here. And yeah, that's kind of it really. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below, and we'll see you on the next video.